All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Moira Bushell, and we are going to be talking about teacher collaboration and coaching tonight, looking at Tier 1 fine and visual motor supports and how they can be utilized in classrooms. So a little bit about me. I am a school-based occupational therapist and have been for the past 8 years. I've worked mostly in pre-K to 8 with a little experience in high schools, but mostly in early elementary. I have worked in many different types of programs, from life skills to social emotional behavioral autism programs, as well as within our general education resource population. I currently work full-time for a special education cooperative. I actually decided to switch jobs in the middle of COVID, so I started my new position in August. It has definitely been a fun learning experience. I think one important thing that I want to mention throughout this is that Illinois has direct access to work with students in schools without prescriptions. So some of the things I'm going to talk about when we're talking about working with students, because of the way the licensure laws are written in Illinois, I had the ability to do some of these things, and that's something that you would want to check with your state to see if you would be able to do within your setting. So before we get started, I want to get an idea of who is in the room so I know who I'm talking to. So the first question I have is, what is your profession?
All right, so it looks like a good chunk of our audience are OTs or OTAs, so 95%. We have a few teachers and a few identifying as others.
Awesome, good to know. And then the second question I have is, how many years have you been in practice?
All right, so we have about 23% saying 0 to 5 years, 13% saying 6 to 10 years, 10% saying 10 to 14 years, and 55% saying 15 plus years.
Wow, I'm impressed with those 15 plus year folks. All right, and then the last question I have is, what is your primary practice setting? I know a lot of times we work in more than one place, but what would you consider your primary practice?
All right, so it looks like a big chunk of our audience is in schools with 89%. We have 3% in early intervention, 3% in outpatient, and 4% saying other.
Awesome, thank you so much. That's what I expected, but good for me to know. All right. So our learning objectives tonight are to look at some resources and strategies that we can use within the school setting to promote the relationships between teachers and occupational therapists, and looking at embedding fine and visual motor developmental activities into curriculum. And we'll also look at the importance of contextual services and how it can support children's fine motor development within the school setting. We're really going to focus on how to foster those relationships, the difference between collaboration and coaching, the experience I had, and how I decide which I will use when I'm working with teachers, as well as looking as a whole about how these things fit into our multi-tier systems of support, or MTSS models, and how we can use our expertise to help all students within school buildings. So the 5 areas that we're going to cover tonight, as I said, we're going to talk about collaboration and coaching within occupational therapy, looking at combining academics with fine motor development within our classrooms. I'm going to talk about a small research project I did using the Fine Motor Boot Camp. I will also talk about the implementation of handwriting programs into general education. And then I'll briefly touch on the impact of COVID-19 on tiered interventions and what are some things that I've seen thus far in my practice, as well as speaking with my colleagues. So collaboration and coaching. What's the difference? Most of the time when you talk to school-based therapists, we talk a lot about collaboration. We're collaborating with teachers, we're collaborating with other related service professionals, and we're collaborating with parents as we create IEPs. When we talk about collaborative consultation, it's defined as the interactive process that enables people with diverse expertise to generate creative solutions to mutually defined problems. So the creative solutions and the mutually defined problems is a key piece of when we're talking about collaboration. This is the most commonly used model in school-based practice under IDEA and MTSS models. It requires staff to work together to find solutions to problems to help students. There is few defined models of the best practice of how to use collaboration, but there is a lot of research to support its use in practice. And when we look at interprofessional relationships and interprofessional education, collaboration is always highlighted. The problem solving that takes place in the collaboration process is based on needs assessments. So whether that's using data from classrooms or it's a specific a survey that's done of teachers or students, it's really based on problem solving for a specific situation. When we look at research to support collaboration in the schools, there is a lot out there, but there is a lot based on small sample sizes. And the other big thing, as I mentioned before, is that there isn't one strong single definition of how to use collaboration. However, all of the studies that I have found show that there's positive outcomes for students when there is a collaboration between an occupational therapist and a teacher. So whether it's supporting sensory processing difficulties and creating accommodations in classrooms, looking at students with developmental coordination disorder and having teachers collaborate with an occupational therapist to provide services within the classrooms, there's always positive outcomes from this relationship. One of the things that's also highlighted in the research is a one-way educational component that comes with a collaboration. So usually before the collaboration or somewhere within the collaboration, the occupational therapist is leading some type of educational opportunity for the teacher or other staff so that that person gains knowledge that they may not have had before, so that they're better able to participate in the problem-solving process. And then there's coaching. Coaching is an area that's newly researched within occupational therapy, and it really focuses on the application of newly acquired knowledge and the reflection of the learner. So as opposed to collaboration, which can be some use of new knowledge, coaching really requires the learner to reflect on the knowledge that they've gained and then how they're using it in practice. It's meant to improve the knowledge and skills of the learner rather than just have a one-way partnership. There is skill building, so the learner feels more equipped to tackle different situations on their own in the future, rather than always relying on the coach or the collaborator for that expert knowledge. Most of the research within occupational therapy as it relates to coaching is within the early education and early childhood settings. And this is because this has been something studied mainly with parents. And within the early intervention model, looking at coaching of parents and building up their skill set so they're better able to help their own children. However, there is a place within the school setting to use a coaching model, and I'll talk a little bit about how I did that. When we're looking at coaching, there's always 5 key characteristics: joint planning, observation, action or practice, reflection, and feedback. The joint planning is the needs assessment, which is sort of similar to how we're looking at a collaborative relationship. However, when we look at the joint planning, it's really what does the learner need help with the most? So it could be that a teacher has a student who's having difficulty with sensory processing within the classroom, but we're really focusing on what does the teacher need to learn about sensory processing so they can then help the student, versus in a collaborative relationship, the occupational therapist is really supporting the teacher in knowing or giving them ideas on how to support the student. The reflection and feedback component are also different and very important. This is often led by the coach because we're looking at the assessment of the application of that learned knowledge. So what is that learned knowledge that the learner has that they didn't have before? How are they using it? And then looking at how the learner feels about their application of that knowledge and what other things might they want to know in the future so that they can continue to learn and grow. When you look at the research about coaching, a lot of it is very recent, which is nice to see. A lot of it, as I said before, has to do with early intervention service providers, but all of the research is very positive. Their coaching was seen to increase positive outcomes in a multitude of studies. However, the main issue that I've seen in a lot of the research and is also mentioned in some is that there's many different operational definitions in the use of coaching. So it's hard sometimes to compare the different research studies because they're slightly differently applying the idea of coaching within the settings. There is a lot of research, mostly done by Dr. Dunn, that talks about coaching in telehealth and how that has improved outcomes. And I'm actually very excited to see some more of that research come out now that there's so much telehealth that's been happening in the past 6 to 9 months. But when we talk about coaching, how do we apply these coaching principles to school-based practice? Over the years, I've done a lot of collaboration because that's what I did field work in my education. That's what I learned the most about. But what I found is there's a lot of teachers who want more. They want to learn more. They want to do more. And so I started to do a little bit of research about coaching and how I could bring some of those ideas into my practice. So when I was looking at coaching principles and practice, there's kind of 2 areas of facilitators and challenges that I've defined that kind of help me decide what approach I'm going to take. Some facilitators are that a lot of schools now have professional learning communities. There's a lot more focus on professional development, sharing of knowledge, working together, and really elevating the educational practice. Because of this, a lot of teachers are open to trying some new things and learning in different ways. As well, with the more known implementation of ESSA, which is the Every Student Succeeds Act, and increased MTSS implementation in the school, the role of occupational therapy is more known and expanding within the school setting. And because of that, I have found that I'm more able to do more because my value is seen within the school setting. The 2 major challenges that I've found in balancing coaching principles is time. It takes a long time to develop the relationships to even get to a place where a coaching relationship makes sense. So that can be very difficult, especially when a lot of occupational therapists are itinerant service providers. When we're also looking at time within the school day, so even if you've been in a building for a long time, carving out time to have those conversations and really do the coaching relationship to the fullest potential can also be difficult when you're also balancing workloads and caseloads and other aspects of your job that need to be done. The other piece is interprofessional dynamics. A coaching relationship has to be a relationship, and sometimes it may not be appropriate based on your setting or the people that you're working with, because it does require a lot of trust. And so sometimes trust is hard to come by, and it has to be earned. And so I could just walk into a situation and tell teachers we're gonna be in a coaching relationship and it's gonna be great. I've had to pick and choose what areas I have worked on coaching with, and I've usually only done 1 or 2 a year just to make it manageable for myself, but also so I can see what kind of impact it's having and whether or not it's working in my setting. So then we come to the age-old question. What makes the most impact in school-based service? I think when you look at the research, there's research to support all of these things: direct service, consultation, coaching models. Newest best practice talks about the importance of consultation and contextual services in providing occupational therapy. This means push-in services, this means working with teachers, it means building the capacity of our students as well as those who work with them. So when you're thinking about how and the ways that you're providing services, coaching might be the way to go if you feel comfortable. If you're not there yet, that's okay. I think a combination of all 3 of these are where we're going to see the most outcomes. I think in certain situations, coaching may be the way to go. I think in other situations, direct service, where then a staff person can really see what you're doing, or the level of need of your student also definitely plays into all of these conversations. I think because of the push for those contextual services and push-in supports, as I've said, occupational therapists are getting more seen and more known, and teachers are seeing more and more and more of what we can do. And I think we're better able to have larger conversations about our role, but also what can we do before we even get to the point where a student needs direct service, which I'll talk about some ways I've done that a little bit later, but try to broaden our scope within the school so that we can be the full-scale occupational therapist and not just the handwriting and sensory people that I know a lot of us are trying to break out of those boxes within the school setting. I wanted to take a pause here for a second to see if anyone had any questions about collaboration or coaching. So now I want to talk about kind of how I took some of those ideas of collaboration and coaching and combined it with academics and fine motor development. So I think when we look at what we do and the importance of the MTSS structures and supporting all students, occupational therapists need to spend a little more time familiarizing ourselves with curriculum and state standards. When we get out of OT school and start working in the schools, I had no idea what a math curriculum was or literacy curriculum or why they chose this curriculum over this one and everything like that. I think it's important as a school provider and as an educator that we spend some time understanding and learning what those curriculums are so that we can speak teacher language. I think when we are able to speak teacher language and provide support based on what they're using in the classroom, we're going to have more success in trying to implement some of the changes that we want to make. Then once we know what those state standards or power standards or Common Core standards or however your district or state does the academic-based standards and assessments, we can then try to learn to provide activities and suggestions based on those things so that we understand the scope and sequence of a specific skill, or we understand how they're teaching, like writing, as in the composition of writing, and ways that we can help there, rather than providing general suggestions. We can be very specific. And if we're very specific, I have found in my practice that teachers are more likely to use those suggestions and then want more of them because they saw that I took the time to understand what their specific role was. So free time for students in classrooms is decreasing, especially now in our hybrid world. If you have hybrid learning, or even if you're in person, the amount of time that students have either center or station time, exploration time, more free time within the classroom is decreasing. However, with an increase in the response to intervention model within the MTSS structure, due to the Every Student Succeeds Act, we're more often called upon to advise and create fine motor activities within the classroom or fine motor interventions. So we're balancing a decreased time in which to do these things and an increased need to do them. So we have to figure out ways that we can be most successful and utilize all of the time we have within the classrooms to the fullest. So we're providing more of our services within the classroom. Teachers are seeing what we're doing. We're providing those consultative services, collaboration, co-teaching, coaching, and even co-teaching with teachers that fall for services that fall under IDEA and ESSA, if you have the ability to co-teach and do that. And research is telling us that fine motor-based RTI interventions at Tier 1, Tier 2, and even Tier 3 are supported to either help students remediate issues and then not need IEPs, or to better identify students who might need IEPs. So we're providing all of these services hopefully within the environment, and we're sometimes doing them only for 1 or 2 students. But what happens if we were to take all of that amazing knowledge we had and apply it to a broader context so that more students can get some of the benefit from those things that we're doing? So a couple years ago, I worked with another occupational therapist in my district, and we wanted to look at fine motor interventions within the classroom. And we chose the Fine Motor Bootcamp to do this intervention because they were ready, pre-made, and we didn't have to think about all the things we wanted to do. The other OT I worked with is Alyssa Ilian, so I want to thank her for her help with all of this. There's 25 pre-made activities. They were able to be upgraded and downgraded, and teachers and or students could do them independently with the classroom. So what we were looking to see is if using these specific types of interventions in the classroom had any effect on fine motor development based on teacher feedback. We utilized 8 early childhood classrooms and 4 early elementary classrooms. We looked at pre and post surveys, looking at the role of occupational therapy within the schools, the teachers' perceptions of utilizing these types of activities in the classroom. the teachers' understanding of fine motor development, as well as the fine motor issues that they were seeing with the students in the classroom. Previous to this study, I'd seen a steady increase in the referrals I would get very on in the kindergarten year, even from some students who had done 2 years of early childhood, not just from the kindergarten students who had not done any schooling at the time. So we really wanted to focus on trying to find something that could be easily scalable and easily done by teachers within the classroom that didn't take a lot of time, but still met some of those academic standards that they already had within the classroom. So they didn't feel like they were trying to smash something else into their curriculum that they didn't have time for. Initially, we provided teacher in services when it was convenient for the teacher. So we tried to group some of the teachers together so that we would they would get all the same information at the same time. But if that didn't work, we did meet one-on-one with them. We then provided each teacher with 5 to 6 different activity lesson plans that had reusable materials that could be easily shared. They were all parsed out into bins so that easily could drop them in the middle of a center and pick them up easy to be cleaned. We switched the activity kits out monthly, and then occasionally one of us would facilitate the use of the kits within the classroom, usually initially to show the teacher how to do it, or to show all the students how to do that specific activity. Because the idea is that once the students understood the activity, they'd be able to do it independently. And so they could be done during a center time, which tends to be a time when a teacher is teaching independence of the students to try to get them used to working on their own or in small groups. When looking at the post survey, we did a post survey about 4 to 5 months after initial use of the product, and the majority of the teachers really liked it. They wanted to keep using it, and it met their needs. The thing that we did too is once we started to see the teachers switching out activities often, we supplemented some more activities within the bundles so that they'd be able to have different things to do. So towards the end, it wasn't just the things from Fine Motor Bootcamp, but it was all activities that we came up with ourselves. We made in the same style, and we added in based on what the teacher need was. So when we look at specific numbers for class results, looking at pre-intervention, a mass majority of the teachers said that their class's fine motor performance was below average. And this is pretty consistent with what I feel most teachers were saying. And I also happen to be myself in many of these classrooms servicing some students on IEPs. And in general, I would agree that their assessment of their classrooms is pretty accurate. And then after the intervention, the vast majority felt their classes had average skills. When looking at areas that were most difficult, pre-writing skills was something that was definitely very difficult. I've seen this in practice as well. Children are not coming in having really used pencils, markers, crayons, scissors, anything like that. And so when looking at pre-writing skills initially, post-intervention, it seems like we're across the board of what things students are having most difficult with. And that's telling me that we must have targeted a little bit of pre-writing if that's not as concern anymore. So what else could we have added in to help teachers with those other areas, that the students still have problems with? So previously, this is one interesting thing. So at the beginning of the year, we're seeing teachers do fine motor activities 4 to 5 days a week. And then towards the end of the year, post-intervention, they're doing it less. Now, I found this really interesting, and I did talk to a couple of teachers about this. And when I talked to them more, they were really looking at when they were looking at this, they were looking specifically at the fine motor bootcamp activities. But what they weren't realizing is that they were doing more fine motor activities and visual motor activities than they thought they were. And so they were decreasing the use of the intervention we gave them, but that didn't mean they were decreasing the types of activities they were using. It was just what specifically that they were doing within the specific research study. Overall, teachers really loved it. I had a lot of positive feedback. When new teachers would come in the next year, they would ask for the activities again. When I had different teachers in different buildings asking me about it, because the kindergarten teachers would all talk about it. So it was something that was really successful. I will say that it did take a lot of time to set up all of the kits for the teachers, but it's something that to look at and how we can scale it is something that's really important to think about when we're talking about interventions within the classroom. The data showed they liked it. The teachers also felt that they could do more in the classroom. So I even found them creating their own as well. So once they saw how some of these things were set up, they were able to pull some of the skills that they were working on and make their own same type activities within the classroom, and weren't just relying on different paid sites to do that stuff for them, but they were using ideas that they had on their own and asking for feedback. And there also appeared to be a benefit in the perception of OT services within the school setting. So in speaking with the teachers, they had a much broader understanding of what our role in the school was, and really looking at to us for our support at that tier 1, tier 2 level, and not just waiting until tier 3 to really ask for our support when they were working on fine motor skills or deficits in their classrooms. So when we're looking at some implications for practice, so this study really looked at that collaboration piece. So how are the occupational therapists working with the teachers to find some of the needs within their classrooms and provide problem solving for that? So providing those structured fine motor ideas can compensate for some of the reduced free time in classrooms, but also some of the reduced opportunities for occupational therapists to get in classrooms with students. These activities can be used in addition to direct service. So looking at your students who are already on direct service, how can you provide some of these ideas to teachers so that there's more carryover? Because we all know the one time a week you see your student for half an hour is probably not enough. So what else can you help the teacher do within the classroom to reinforce those skills using some of these ideas? And the other piece is looking at education we can provide teachers. So how can we as occupational therapists provide education to teachers on fine motor development and what that means within their class setting, and look at ways that we can, what things that they're already doing, but also look at the appropriate progression of fine motor development and what we should actually be expecting from students rather than what they think they should be expecting, so that we can all be on the same development. I know that's a conversation I have with teachers a lot, that sometimes their expectations are a little too high for their students because they want them to exceed and excel, which I totally understand. But trying to really frame what is developmentally appropriate when we're looking at these skills within the classroom, but then how can we use a lot of these activities to build capacity within our teachers and our students. So I did want to ask you guys a question. Is how do you currently link academic standards to your practice in the school setting? Maybe outside of just putting the required common core standard or state standard on your IEP goals.
So if you all look in the chat box, there's a link to a Google form that you can click on and we can get some feedback. Maybe while we're waiting for some of those results to come in, we could check in on some of these questions we've had come in. If
Sure.
that's all right with you? Okay.
That
so
works.
One question was, how involved with admin are you to set up the tone for acceptance of OT coaching?
That's a really good question. I would say very. I think it is not successful unless you have administrative support who can back you up. I have worked with some admin that were not super open to it, and I kept going back to them in a very collaborative way to try to understand kind of where they were coming from, and I learned to speak their language. And so I would kind of try to find out what the sticking point was. I had one principal I worked with who just really thought that I was like the fine motor sensory and I could not do anything else at all. And so when I went to him and I brought our new state practice standards and I said, hey, this is what I want to try to do. This is an issue that I know you're having, and kind of try to get an in based on something that's happening in the school. SEL, anything social emotional related, is a hot button topic in schools these days. And that for me has been my wide open door to at least get that conversation going, to get the admin to kind of understand what kind of benefit and knowledge I can bring to the table. And then usually once that happens, I'm more able to develop those relationships with teachers and kind of move into a coaching model because I have that admin support. So it does take work. It's not something that happens immediately, and it's something that you have to want to do, and it's going to take time. And you may not get all your plan times because you're meeting with a teacher or meeting with an admin, but you have to put in that little bit of extra sometimes to get the outcomes that you want.
Great. Would you like to take another question, or do we want to go to?
I can go to these. I got 19 responses. Thank you, guys. So, and looking at what people are saying, I see a lot of stuff having to do with handwriting and academics, which I like. Supporting writing assignments, a lot of handwriting. Oh, I like this one. I use the scope and sequence of each grade level to develop IEP goals and objectives. Perfect. And I see a lot of people saying, I don't, but I wish I did, it's self-reflection. I can say I did not, it took me several years to realize I should be doing this. So working with specific criteria based on reading programs, relying on teacher feedback. Okay. Great. I really like, thanks for all of that. So yeah, it seems like there's a wide variety of ways people are linking them. A lot of stuff related to handwriting, which makes sense. And then a lot of folks also saying that you haven't yet, but you'd like to learn more. So I really like that as well. So the next question I have is, what types of Tier 1 fine and visual motor supports do you currently provide?
All right, and again, that link to the Google form is in your chat box, so you guys can click right on there.
And I can take some more questions while we wait for these.
Great. So another question that's come in is, how do you handle the boot camp during COVID? Million-dollar question right there.
So honestly, I have made each kid their own. Yes, that takes a lot of time, but right now I'm in a slightly different place because I am working with our early childhood and kindergarten students, and I'm only in self-contained classrooms. And so right now I'm in a very different place than where I was when I did this, when I was in general education. I think there are ways to look at the activities that you're doing, and if you get each kid a kit of the things that they might need a lot of, and some of the things that always come to mind are like small tongs and tweezers, pom-poms, paper clips, a ruler, clothespins, just kind of get standardized like kits for all the kids. And then when you're looking at the activities, you'll start to learn about ways you can reuse all those materials, but it does require initially in the beginning, kids having their own kits. And I did do that a little bit with my students who I sent materials home. So we were in a situation where we had some students who chose to be in school and some on remote. So I did create those same kind of kits to send home. And so I use all of that stuff with the things that we're doing. And the teachers also know what I sent home. So we do group planning, and they do a unit plan, and I see what types of activities they're using. And then I provide some input on what things to grab from the kind of kit I sent home for them. But yes, everything in COVID is a new ballgame. So we have to get super creative with less.
I'm going to throw in a plug for Therapro right there, because we just came up with a essential hand skills kit. It's not quite on the website yet, but it's going to be there in a few days, and it has all those items that you just mentioned prepackaged with 10 fine motor activities included. So some of that job may have just been done for you.
Yeah, and I'm all about not reinventing the wheel. If you're in a position where you can get that stuff done for you, use your time effectively.
Yes. All right.
All right, so I have some responses to the questions. A lot of people say none, because some of it just it doesn't say why, but a lot of it has to do with caseloads, and really looking at having to just do IEPs, whether some people are contracts so they can't do that, which makes sense too. And a lot of some of the responses also say that they wish they could, they just haven't figured out how, and that's okay. I've done some work with AOTA and talking about how important this is and how we can get some information out for OTs to be able to talk about these things and why they're important and how much benefit it would have in the long run if the districts would just do a little bit in the beginning. But I know it's a little bit of a dollars thing because we are usually paid from the IDEA funds versus ESSA funds. So kind of looking at that and kind of getting language for OTs to be able to make some of those things. Also seems like using stuff in the classroom, slant boards, paper, grippers. Okay, so there's a little bit of mix of not doing it at all or providing some good interventions. Awesome. Thanks for providing that. That helps me see what other people are doing, just because I have a very limited knowledge of my area as well as my state, but it's nice to hear what people are doing around the country too. So what I'd like to do now in thinking about some of these things, and I think the COVID question was a good question, is I want to spend a little bit of time going through a couple areas and see if you guys can come up with some activities that that you might be able to do related to any one of these areas. So the first one is letter names. So what are some like tier 1 or center activities that could be done in classrooms for all students that have a fine motor or a visual motor base to target letter names?
All right, so that link is right in your chat box. All right, so how much time per day did the OT spend in each classroom that was part of the study? Was this in addition to your direct service time, and what was the amount of direct service time per OT's caseload?
Got it. So there was 2 of us, and I would say maybe a half hour a week at the beginning, and towards the end we weren't in there at all because it was all run by the teachers. So we weren't in the classrooms outside of like IEP time. So I would say an additional 30 minutes a week in the beginning. But some of it I know on my end would be in conjunction with some of my minutes. So if I had a student in the room, I would work with that student on those activities, and then the teacher would kind of see what I was doing. And then if I didn't have a student, that would be an additional time. So if it was 10 classrooms, technically it was 5 hours a week for only a couple of weeks, and then we faded the support. So it was definitely front loaded, but then we faded fairly quickly.
Okay, do you want another question or you want to go into the form?
I will go into the form because I've got like 20 responses. Okay, so there's some, good stuff in here. Play-Doh letter formation, letter stamps, letter stickers, crossword puzzles, wiki sticks, memory game with letters, letter beads on pipe cleaners, drawing, making letters in Therapro, hole punch letters, alphabet beads, bottle cap, magnet letters, puzzles, Play-Doh. You guys have great ideas. I hope you can use all these in practice. Easel, dry erase, tracing, toothpick and Play-Doh. Awesome. So some things that I came up with, that some of these were on here, that I use. So clothespin matching. I love clothespins. Most of the students I work with has never seen one of them before. That's okay. But matching letters. So I'll put a letter on the clothespin, and sometimes I'll have them match the lowercase, or I'll have them match letter to letter. Or I'll even do it, I'll call out a letter and they have to find it on a strip. Small stickers to make letters, so having a big letter printed on the page, and then they have to pull the sticker to kind of trace the letter. Searching for the letters in the rice bins. Rainbow letters is also a big favorite of mine, where they trace the letter in multiple colors, and they get to kind of make their own design. And then stamping words into Play-Doh is another fun one that I have done. So the next one is spelling, because this one I know comes up a lot in the classroom.
All right, so that's in your chat box. And Moira, a question for you while we're waiting.
Yes,
how do you resolve the fine motor development with the need for teachers to meet curriculum standards by specific points in the school year?
Oh, yes. So I think this one's hard, and I'm actually currently working through this right now too. I think you also have to link it to significantly discrepant. And so if we're going to the kind of opposite end of the spectrum and we're talking about like what would qualify for someone for special education, you're talking about a significant discrepancy from peers. So even if a student's not meeting the standard that the teacher has or the curriculum has, is that student then significantly discrepant from peers? That's usually where I start, because even if the standard is not where motorically we think the student should be, or the research supports, and the standard's a little further, that significantly discrepant piece is usually where I can get the most bang for my buck, because they're not that significantly discrepant. They are probably discrepant and not meeting standards, but that's when I can start giving some of these activity ideas to help the teacher, like, I don't know what to do, what can I do? Providing these to the teacher. I provided parent handouts targeting some of this stuff too, because it's all things that anyone can do with the children. So that's usually how I've kind of tackled that piece, and that's something that I battle all the time, especially in kindergarten, because if you look at the kindergarten Common Core standards is write most upper and lowercase letters by the end of kindergarten. It's most, not all. And so when I have teachers frantically coming to me because they write the G backwards, I'm like, hold up, that's the standard. So I try to find the standards that help me make my case and go from there. All right, I got some good spelling ones. Scrabble tiles, shaving cream, letter stickers, alphabet stamps. Oh, matching plastic egg ends to make words. I like that. Word walls, stacking blocks with letters on them to make words. Great. Legos. Legos are one of my personal favorites. Shower liner made boxes and wrote letters of the alphabet, and they jump out their spelling words. That's super fun. I know you did note it's more gross motor, but that's I like that one too. Word builders, word prediction for older kids. Awesome. So some things that I came up with, again, clothespins, because I love them. Letter beads are really fun, so they have to pick out the beads and string them on. I usually use pipe cleaners rather than string, because it's a little stiffer. Paperclip initial sound or middle sound or ending sound activities if you're working on if they're working on CVCs to help with spelling. Letter stamp, and then pencil tracers as well are another fun activity that I like to do with the kids. All right, next we're gonna move into numbers. I'm curious to hear how you guys work on numbers.
All right, those are in the chat box. And another question for you, Moira. Do you target executive function goals?
Yes, but not by myself. So I think when you look at executive functioning is this big, massive thing. And I do feel that in some ways, occupational therapists have been pushed out of the executive functioning issue kind of domain within schools, unless it's so bad and then they throw us in at the end, rather than consulting with us all along the way. So I would say yes, I do have a lot of students that have a lot of that planning and organization when it comes to transitioning with appropriate materials or following a similar routine within the classroom or gathering the materials they need. So yes, I do, but I never do it alone. I am never the sole implementer on those goals. I wholeheartedly believe that we should never be the sole person on a goal. We may be the person who's taking the most data, but we should never be the person that is the only person working on the goal. They should be a team, and we should all be working on them together. So yes, I do executive functioning goals. All right, I got some good number recognition. Number bottle caps in rice bin, using apps, dice games for numbers. That's awesome. Pom-poms, Play-Doh, wiki sticks to make the numbers, mini erasers from Target. pincer graphs to pick up and count. Oh, I like that too. Dice, number stamps, blocks, bottle caps, making cards and they have to match the number of clothespins for items, or hole punch the number too. Using cupcake papers with the numbers on the bottom, and they have to fill them using tongs and tweezers. If you don't have cheap tongs and tweezers, that's one of my favorite therapy goes to. Snap beads for numbers, so using snap beads to have them count, or even to move to patterning when you get there. Play-Doh mats are another thing that we can use for number recognition as well. All right, last one is addition. Or if you have ideas for subtraction too, I'll take them, but math equations.
All right, that's in your comment box. And a question for you, Moira. How can an OT make sure they do not take on the role of an educator and stay in the domain of OT when doing academic-related OT?
That's a really good question. I think your primary focus needs to be the motor task that you're doing, but you're linking it to the academic standard. And what I mean by this is, like, when we're working on addition, your goal is to not teach the students 1 + 1. Your goal is to facilitate the student using a motor task to figure out what 1 + 1 is. And so when we're looking at participation and we're looking at a student's ability to complete their role as a student, and part of that in the school has a lot to do with fine and visual motor development, it's using your occupational therapy lens to look at the motor part of the task and focus your part on that, but then bring in the other piece. So it's kind of like thinking about using contextual services and using purposeful services, rather than, you know, we always talk about cone stacking. We don't want to do cone stacking in skilled nursing because there's no purpose. So the purpose of doing the addition activity is to have a purposeful task that is something that the child will do every day, but we're bringing in the motor lens and how we're applying our occupational therapy and looking at the skills the child needs in order to do that activity and the environment in which it's happening, and their personal factors and how it's impacting their ability to participate in that activity. I hope that answered that question. If I didn't, you can provide a little bit, you can let me know. All right, addition. Clothespin, beads, pom-poms, tongs, blocks, groups of items, tongs and tweezers for patterns, marbles, Connect 4, the Kinder Surprise eggs to add more coins, puzzles. Great, great, great. I love it. And just the last thing, if you have any super awesome ideas that have worked well for you that you haven't necessarily put in any, I would love to hear them, so you can share them with others.
All right, that's in your chat box. And a couple questions on Tier 1 support. So one of them is, when you say Tier 1, is that just providing items for students to use in the classroom, like move and sit cushions or slant board? And another question on that same kind of strand is, what are Tier 1 visual motor supports?
Sure. So Tier 1 is things that all students have access to in the classroom. So it can really be anything. It's just things that are available to everyone and aren't targeted for necessarily a specific student with a specific skill deficit. If you're looking for more visual motor stuff, sometimes it will be, for me, looking at if we need access to different types of scissors, so that they can complete some visual motor work, or do they maybe need the slant board for the fine motor and the visual motor part of the handwriting. So they kind of go together a little bit at Tier 1. It's when you get higher in the system, then you really start to parse out what specifically it is. But when I look at Tier 1, it's things that are able to be accessed by all students within the classroom, and aren't specific to any one student that we are problem solving. So it'd be a benefit to everyone. Okay, so we got some good best ideas. Ripping paper activities. Yes, yes, yes. I actually did a ripping paper pumpkin activity today with my preschoolers. Makerspace with Legos. Awesome. Bubbles as rewards. Kids love bubbles. Anything with stickers. Finding letter beads in Therapro. Yeah, so hiding stuff in Therapro and having kids find them and do them for stuff like that. You need any manipulative use. Oh, Mr. Mouth, that's a fun game. I think there's one, Pop the Pig. That's another fun game that kids get to use. Anything with Play-Doh. Great, great, great. Thank you all for those awesome ideas. Any other questions, Allison, that would make sense before I go on to handwriting?
Yeah, I think we have just a couple here. How do you balance fine motor needs within an ADL task that are closely related to outpatient peds? How do you keep them separated?
Oh, that's a good question. I guess I would need to have a little more information on what. So, yes, so I think yes, I see where you're going, and I actually have a student who I'm trying to balance that with. I look at it as, what is it within the school setting that fine motor deficit is impeding? And if it's most likely, it's not nothing, because if there is an ADL issue, usually we're also seeing it somewhere else. Now, that's not always the case, and also with how old the student is, that's going to impact us a little bit too, because then you look at how long they had therapy and not made progress. But I think I don't know that I have a good answer to that, because I feel like it's very specific to the student and the thing we're working on. I can think of one example now. I have a student who has some fine motor deficits, and the thing that outpatient peds is really working on with him is pulling down his pants so that he can toilet. And so he has some issues with his pincer grasp. However, within the school setting, I see that same issue in his ability to manipulate the crayons and within the classroom, or they do a lot, he's in preschool, and they do a lot of work with manipulatives, or even him picking up the materials he needs to use to do that is difficult for him. So I try to focus on how that is impacting him within the classroom, even if that foundational skill is also needed for something in the ADL as well.
All right, looks like we are cleared out with questions for now, so let's move on.
Awesome. And then I also just saw someone put in virtual escape rooms. Yes, virtual escape rooms are really neat. I haven't been able to use them this year just because I have younger kids, but I'm excited to hopefully get to use them in the future. So I want to talk a little bit about handwriting, because this came up in a lot of the things that you were talking about, and looking at handwriting instruction. Most schools we know do not have handwriting curriculum, or if they do have a handwriting curriculum, teachers are not educated on how to effectively implement it, or they're just kind of given the materials and say, let's go. We also have to think about, we're not just handwriting teachers, right? That's not specifically our role, although sometimes handwriting does come under our domain when we're looking at fine and visual motor skills. So what I was trying to do with handwriting instruction at Tier 1 is provide a framework for that instruction that led to greater teacher buy-in, so that they were able to do the whole thing by themselves, and I could just support once we got to Tier 2 and Tier 3, so I could really target the students that I needed to, who actually really needed occupational therapy support, because they've already been getting the instruction, which is sometimes the thing that's definitely missing. Here, I was able to co-teach. So co-teaching is a great opportunity for us to get into the classrooms and assist teachers in initial handwriting implementation. And because many teachers feel ill-equipped, they like having the support of someone who is supposed to be an expert in this area to help them kind of get started. We can model appropriate ways to grasp the writing utensils and teach the motor sequences and look at ergonomics for improved writing, so we're not pushing kids too far too fast. It can also be done in conjunction with student IEP time and goals. So what I would try to do is, when I was doing this, if I had a student in the classroom that was working on this goal, I would try to use part of my time that I was in the classroom. I was working with that student. I was just also co-teaching with the teacher. and also providing some extra practice within the classroom for that student who really needed it. So I utilized Here the Size Matters handwriting program because I felt like it had the most research to support its use. And it was also really fun, and the teachers really seemed to like it. I found success using this program, but any handwriting program is better than no handwriting program. You making one up and following developmental sequence of letters and helping teachers teach it is better than nothing. A lot of times what I see is where there are now these super rigorous writing content programs that the kids are just supposed to start labeling things, and they've never even been taught how to make letters. So they learn how to make them on their own, and they're sideways and backwards, and they're coming up from the bottom. So as they age, they're not efficient with their writing process. And so that's something that we would definitely want to try to think of as moving forward when we're thinking about handwriting. So what I did is I front-loaded a lot of support. So I co-taught in 3 kindergarten classrooms. I did 30 minutes a week and 2 15-minute chunks. The teacher did at least 1 to 2 more lessons a week than when I wasn't in the room. After about 4 weeks, I faded the support, and I only co-taught 1 period. And after 6 to 8 weeks, I wasn't in the classroom anymore, and the teachers were continuing to implement this curriculum on their own, and they just came to me with questions, or if I happened to be in the classroom working with another student, they would ask it. For me, this was only required for the new teachers, and in the first year, I did this for 3 years. Once we got to year 2, I did 1 initial lesson with all the kids and the teacher in the classroom, and then the teachers were off and running. So it really was a lot of front-loaded issue and front-loaded support I provided, but then the teachers were off and running because they felt so comfortable doing the program. So using these tier 1 supports within the classroom, I think the biggest overall thing I saw with the handwriting and all of the fine motor boot camp things is my referrals went almost to 0. So my first couple of years in this school, I'd get 10+ referrals for handwriting, fine motor. They can't hold a scissor. They don't know how to hold a pencil. They can't write their name. To the last year I was in the school, I got 1 referral, and it was a completely justified referral, and it was one of those red flag kids that I even, within a day of seeing the student in the classroom, I went to our school psychologist and I said, I think this child's gonna need an IEP eventually. So to look at that, to see how much work that I did in the beginning, but how much of a difference it made, meant a lot. Teachers appreciate the help and support throughout the school day. A lot of occupational therapists are itinerant, and we're in and out, and we don't get to feel part of communities within schools because of our role. And for me, this was something that's been really important. I'm a daughter of teachers. I'm married to a teacher. Being in education was something that was really important to me, and occupational therapy and education is my mix of my happy place. And so for me to feel part of the school and to really feel that I was making a difference, having that teacher buy-in and really getting to know the teachers and their style and what worked for them was important. And the teachers appreciated the help and really had not seen an occupational therapist do something in the past, and that's something that they benefited from within the classroom. Some of the challenges I found overall between all of these things is that they felt like they didn't have enough time. So if they put up that wall, sometimes I wasn't able to kind of help them break it down. But what I would do is I would offer to come in the classroom and do it for them one day. Or if I saw some of these teachers on days when they didn't have their extra classes like gym or music or art, they'd have extra kind of flex blocks, and I'd offer to come into the flex block and kind of demonstrate some of these activities and how they could be used in the classroom. We also need to be better at linking our activities to learning standards to justify their inclusion. So we know that fine motor development is important, and we know that it's not happening the way it needs to, and we know that the kids need more activities with their hands and more ways to do things, especially with what's happening now. But we have to, in general, have to be better at linking those activities to learning standards and speaking teacher language so that we can get to the place where that stuff is just second nature and it's happening in the room. In regards to handwriting, a lot of teachers don't feel comfortable teaching it, or if they have the book, they just, I think in the setting I'm now, I've noticed that they have a book, they do 4 to 5 letters in a 20-minute period, and they're through the book in about 3 weeks. Not the most appropriate use of this handwriting routine. So kind of looking at the way teachers are using it, help provide some of that education so that we can help them be supportive in this environment. And lastly, I want to talk a little bit about remote learning and tiered interventions. So many of us are currently remote. Many of us were remote at one point, and we're not quite sure when full education is going to be back the way it used to be, sharing materials, able to see our students and work with them a lot. So when looking at tiered supports, MTSS still exists. We still should be providing some of these interventions to students, but how we identify those students and what we provide is going to look a little different. So we're still providing observations during class time, but we're providing observations sometimes over some sort of technology, or we're providing observations in a classroom environment that looks very different. For example, right now in some of my classrooms in preschool, we are only allowing students with IEPs, and so that means there's a max of 5 kids when there's usually a max of 15. So students present very differently when there's 5 students in the room and they're working almost independently most of the day versus having 15 students and working collaboratively. So taking into account kind of what the differences might be in environments, but still paying attention to how we can provide supports. Technology issues, obviously a concern. How is a student interacting with technology? Is that technology meeting their needs? Where if they were in school, they wouldn't have that barrier to whatever issue that they're having, and how can we problem solve that? And environmental factors. Home is different than school. Things happen at home. Do they have a place to learn? Do they have the right seating? Do they have a place where limited distractions? We need to meet the students at where they're at. So some of the supports that we're providing right now may look a little bit different than what we would do if they're in the classroom, but their home is right now is their classroom. So we need to think outside the box in order to do this. And this is where those collaborative relationships come in. And I say collaborative because we need to, this is a lot more problem solving and doing rather than more coaching model. I think we need to be providing support to teachers as best we can to get them the information they need in order to help them be successful, because we are all stretched super thin of I think it was like 90% of you that work in schools. And we are all stretched very thin right now, and we're all working as best as we can. And we're all trying to do the best for the kids. And so thinking about what that looks like and ways to work together so that we can work smarter and not harder is definitely the way to go, so that we can kind of get through this. And also know that when kids come back to us, they're going to be in a very different place than probably the last time we saw them. And how can we use some of the things that I just talked about to catch them up? How can we blend a lot of that academic and fine motor work and blend all that stuff together so that we can get the most bang for our buck when we're trying to help these students as they progress? So with that, I will leave it open for more questions.
All right, so another question that's come in is, how much time do you try to give to trial Tier 1 supports to take effect before proceeding to Tier 2, Tier 3 evaluations, etc.?
Usually I've heard 6 to 8 weeks of data per level. But that also depends on the situation. Sometimes you'll be presented and you just know, and you can kind of jump to Tier 2 before you even try some of the Tier 1 stuff. But usually, in talking with most of my my school psychologist friends, it's 6 to 8 weeks. Sometimes you'll hear 4 to 6, but usually I hear 6 to 8 weeks per tier. And then you will upgrade the intensity and the intensity of the intervention in each tier. So it won't just be 6 to 8 weeks, of trialing this. It could be that this next 6 to 8 weeks could be doubling, tripling, quadrupling, and then changing what the intervention is in the next tier.
So I'm not quite sure if there's a question or comment here, but just a statement. Many remote students are not using manual writing, just technology.
Yes, I would agree with that. So I think that's where they're going to come back to school, and it's going to be a little, different. This is for sure the case, because when I had to make my remote learning packets, I made one. They were like this thick because I wasn't sure how much stuff to send home. And then I looked at my other service providers and the teachers, and they weren't sending like any paper, anything. I'm like, okay, but we know our students need paper and pencil, and I'm not about killing trees. So I tried to, use some wipe off erase, even though we all know that that might be great, but it doesn't work on pressure, or it's not as fine motor controlled as those markers kind of are loosey-goosey and go everywhere. But I do agree that, yes, I think that lack of hand usage is going to be huge when we get back into classrooms, as well as kind of switching from near point to far point is definitely also going to be something I'm going to pay attention to, because the students have had basically to just look at the screen and be in near point this whole time. And so for students who haven't been in school very long to now have to learn to switch their gaze and stay focused is going to be really interesting to watch.
Great. Another question that's come in is, with remote learning and therapy, how do you advocate for the student when the teacher is not collaborative or communicative? I.e., we have had a lot of no-shows with students due to hybrid transitions back to school, and there was an instance in which a teacher decided not to log the student into a therapy session.
Did not allow the student into the session?
She didn't log the student into the therapy session.
Oh, interesting. Well, I think there's two parts to this. I think there's the one, to me, that's a big issue, because if it's a therapy session, I assume it's IDEA or 504 mandated and it's required by law. So that's a whole different conversation. But I would gently remind the teachers that, you know, that your service is required, and you understand that that this is remote learning and hybrid and it's different, but that your services are again required by law. So you have to meet them. I think the other piece is not having students log in, which I had today. It happens. I think it's a partnership with families. I think it's trying to figure out where the family is at and what support you can provide them. I know I have adjusted some of my models to be a little more early intervention coaching style, where I'm working with the parent. So yes, am I trying to help the student with whatever skill we're working on? Yes, but right now, since the student's learning environment is their home and their parent is assisting, it's what can I help the parent do, and what can I teach the parent about what I'm trying to do to help the student, if the parent is available, to kind of work through some of that stuff. For some of the older students, it's really kind of working through, like, what is the purpose of this? What are we doing here? And kind of creating a learning contract with the student to kind of build that relationship so that the older students want to show up.
Okay, so here's another, just a suggestion from somebody here saying that they try to pair fine motor with like the zones of regulation activity. So drawing, cutting, gluing emotions into the correct zones. But any other ideas there?
Yes, let me think. We have done that a lot. Sometimes we'll do, I'm trying to think what it's called. Like I'll create the emotion cards, and then I have like 4 different kind of monsters that are the different colors. And even sometimes I use the inside out characters, and then I create a big mouth. So they actually have to take their like tongs and feed the emotion into the right color, if that makes sense. Or I'll use different colored beads to have them string even during the day of how they're feeling. So as they go on, they can see at different points of the day, were they all green, or do they have a couple of yellow moments? And we kind of talk about that. Those are some things that I can think of off the top of my head.
Great. Another question, how are you incorporating the participation model into your IEP goals and objectives?
I think that's a good question. I think I'm really looking at, you know, what is really impeding the student, and trying to think about it a little more holistically, and not being so stuck in the student can't write their name, or the student can't do something, but what are they able to do, and then build on their strengths in order to find out what's really stopping them from taking the next step, and what is stopping them from fully participating in the school environment independently. And I take a look at it a little bit more that way, and try to be a little more strengths-based with how I approach things, rather than very deficit model-based, which I know in the beginning of my career, and even still now, I have to kind of switch my brain a lot to be a little more strengths-based, so I can look at that participation.
Great. Okay, last call for questions. Anybody got anything more we can put in those that question box? In the meantime, can we just make sure that everybody has downloaded their certificate of attendance and their handouts? Once we exit out of this webinar, we will not have access to those. All right, let's see. Anybody else? I think that's it for questions then tonight. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Moira, for presenting. These are some great, oh, one more. Any other handwriting programs you would suggest?
Oh, see, that's a tough question. That's a hard question for me to answer. I can honestly say my favorite is the Size Matters handwriting program. I have used them all. I will use them all depending on what setting I'm in. That's hard because I prefer that. I've seen Foundations. You know, that's a different one. Handwriting Without Tears has a different paper format. Then there's TV Teacher, I think is one. And then there's a couple that are on Teacher to Pay Teachers. As I said, it's really what you feel comfortable with. I use the Size Matters handwriting program because it's research supported in multiple different research studies and some of the largest research studies. And I am all about evidence-based practice. And so that's why I tend to use that one. And it seems the easiest for me to implement within the classroom. So that's why I use that one, but there's plenty out there. I think you need to find one that you're comfortable with using.